Are you an international student who wants to know about different visa options and how to navigate your journey as an international student? Then continue watching this video. Hello everyone, my name is Rafeda. I post videos on international student journeys, study abroad tips, product management, and more. So make sure to like this video and subscribe to the channel. For this video, our guest is Soundarya, who is definitely an inspiration to international students. Soundarya got her O-1 visa approved this year. She's a graduate from Columbia University and ex-product manager at Salesforce before she even started her own company. She's also the author of great books that's Admitted and Unshackled. We will be speaking about H1B, O-1 visa, EB1 visa, so make sure you watch this video till the end. We will also be discussing the mistakes to avoid as an international student and more. So continue watching this video. Hello, Soundarya. It is so nice to have you. How are you?
Hi, I'm doing well. How are you?
I'm good. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank
Um, so before we even start and get into like a lot of questions, how about you tell us the glimpse of your journey so far, starting as an international student to getting an O1 right now?
Sure. The beginning parts of the journey is pretty similar to any other student, I would say, wherein I finished my bachelor's in India. I went to NIT Trichy to do my bachelor's in chemical engineering, and
Okay.
then moved to the States to do my master's in management sciences at Columbia University. Um, I was also moving from a research to management, kind of crossing the bridge there. So the degree at Columbia was very helpful because I could choose what subjects I wanted to learn
Mhm.
for the most part. Like if I had to take, say, 12 courses, I could choose 8 out of 12 courses myself. And that was great since we didn't have that flexibility in India at the university that I went to. It was kind of a prescribed solution versus a la carte where you can go and choose what you wanted.
Mhm.
Um, And post Columbia, I joined Salesforce to work as a product manager. I would say that's also a pretty traditional path that I see a lot of students take, which is to join a tech company. But that's when I think my journey started to diverge from maybe a more mainstream path that students take. Because within the first month
Yeah.
of staying at Salesforce, I knew that something was wrong because I wasn't feeling excited about the job itself or what I was doing there. The idea of working there was more exciting than the reality of it. So after, let's just say, very long story short, about 2.5 years later, I was able to quit. I moved to a very small startup to work there part time while also working on independent projects of my own.
Okay.
And then I moved back to India in 2023 because I wanted to build my own company, incorporate a company and work through that. And I couldn't do that in the States. So then I came back to India. The day I landed, I set up a company. And then I published my book, built the community for immigrants. And then I got the O1 through my company to finally return back to the US. So it's been a long journey.
Yeah, but definitely so inspiring. Like I follow all your content on LinkedIn, and it
Thank
is
you.
definitely so, so inspiring. Um, so you mentioned about Salesforce. The first question, since I do like a product podcast as well, how did you get into Salesforce and how did you come across product management?
Yeah, how did I come into Salesforce? Honestly, I applied to so many companies at that point that I don't even remember why I chose Salesforce. It was one of 100 companies that I applied to. And I didn't hear back for 6 weeks after I applied. So obviously, I thought that they forgot about me or they rejected me. But 6 weeks after I applied, I get an email from the recruiting manager, Ryan, and he's inviting me for an interview. And I still remember because this was in somewhere around late February 2018.
Mhm.
I was walking back from lunch to the next class that I had, and I saw this email and I freaked out because um, at that point I was getting rejections after rejections. So getting this email felt like some sort of redemption. Finally, something good is happening. Um, and then within the next 2 weeks, the entire interview process was over, and I got the offer to join Salesforce. Specifically about product management, I actually joined as a technical program manager for
Oh,
my internship. It wasn't a product position, but I
mhm.
transitioned into a product position when I joined back full time.
Yeah.
Um, but I don't even, I remember looking for consulting roles in the beginning because I thought I wanted to be a consultant
Okay.
at McKinsey, BCG, and such.
Yeah.
But along the way, once again, I think as students, we have our own choices when we enter these programs. We think, oh, I definitely want to be a product manager. But sometimes the universe tells otherwise.
Yeah.
The world kind of pushes you towards something else, and it's a slow transition. Even in my case, it took a few months for me to go from I am absolutely becoming a consultant to, oh, maybe I should consider other roles like
Right.
product management, which also have characteristics that I enjoy, such as working with people every day, um, consuming a lot of content, writing documents, all of these things that I really enjoy. So I think thinking in first principles is probably more helpful than being very rigid on that is the role I want.
Right. That makes sense. Thank you so much for sharing that. In terms of it was such a big decision on leaving a great corporate job. How did you, even take that decision from like leaving that job and starting your own company?
Yeah, this is going to sound so unhelpful for anyone out there, but deciding to leave was the easiest choice of my life. I it was not even a I didn't struggle to decide, oh, should I leave or not? Rather, the struggle was how do I do that on a visa? How can I work on my own ideas on a visa?
Yeah.
And how can I work for myself on a visa? So it was all kind of centered around immigration, which is what got me into Unshackled and writing a book on immigration. But I think a more helpful response is I had been working at Salesforce for about 2.5 years when I quit. So I was able to pay off my education loan by then.
Mm-hmm.
And I had some savings because I live very frugally. I only have expenses for rent and food, and that's pretty much it. So I had a lot of money to spare because Salesforce paid very, very well. And so when I quit, I made it a point that I will set aside 6 months worth of savings
Okay.
and not worry about money for those 6 months. Of course, I still worried a lot about money
Yeah.
because you can't really trick your mind too much, I think. Um, but for anyone else out there who's thinking, maybe corporate life is not for me, I want to do something different, my advice is threefold. Number one, make sure you set aside 6 months or ideally more worth of savings.
Yeah.
So you don't, because worrying about money is the fastest way to rob you of creative potential. Just really, really the fastest way. So number one is that. Number two, please have somebody that you can call at 2 a.m. in the night when you feel like, I don't think I can do this. I had somebody call Rajesh Sethi, who is a mentor, a father figure for me, and someone that I could rely on any time of the day if I was freaking out. That was so helpful. And third and most importantly, go to a co-working space. Just because you quit your job doesn't mean you don't have to wake up and go to work anymore. um, I never gave up my co-working membership. I kept going in every day, and that like I just this sense of waking up with a purpose was important for me.
Yeah, it's so difficult. Like if you're especially working from home and then, you know,
Yeah.
it's difficult to maintain that lifestyle and get back into the same background. Okay, I still want to work right now just for myself, but I want to work and fulfill my dreams. It's very important to have a core working space. I completely agree with that. Um, I'm sure you would have struggled with this as well, like different types of visa status. Let's start with H1B first of all. Can you tell us more about H1B overall?
Yeah, absolutely. Let's see. Well, I'm actually gonna do a comparison between H1B and O-1 because
Okay.
I do think a lot of people know about the H1B already.
Yeah.
Um, So, imagine a table, H1B and O1. Number one, H1B is capped. which
Yeah.
means there's about 85,000 visas that is given out every single year. And that hasn't changed in the last 20 years, I would say.
Right.
O1, on the other hand, is uncapped, which means there is no limit on the number of visas given out.
Yeah.
And that's such a it's a revelation for a lot of people out there because they think O1 is only for this like Nobel Prize or PhD recipients, but that's not really true, and we'll come to that soon. Second is H1B is capped to 6 years. It's not just cap on number of visas given out, it's also the cap on the duration of how long you can have an H1.
Okay.
So it expires after 6 years, whereas the O1 does not expire. You can keep extending it indefinitely as long as you keep proving that you're still an extraordinary alien in your field.
That makes sense.
The third very important differentiation is that the H1B has a minimum wage requirement.
Mhm.
So if you're employed by, it doesn't matter if it's a startup or a big company, for your position and level, you have to be paid above the minimum wage that's set by the Department of Labor. On the other hand, the O1 does not have a minimum wage. And this is fantastic for founders because founders don't really want to take money out of their company. They want to put everything back in. So that's why O1 is very often called the startup visa.
Okay.
So these are three major differences. There's a few more that I can talk about, but hopefully that gives an overview.
Yes, definitely it does. So starting with, I got one of the questions regarding just specifically for H1B. When anyone is looking for a job currently and you want to make sure that you're not like system rejected automatically, what are the tools that could be helpful? I know that one of them is H1B grader. What other tools can anyone use?
Um, well, I recently spoke to the founder of this company called f1hire.com.
Okay.
Um, they've built this Chrome extension that is free that you can add on to your Chrome server, and it filters job for like jobs that have offered sponsorship in the past.
Okay.
So I'm assuming they like collect data from different sources and then check for has this company ever sponsored somebody in the past for an H1B before. So that tool seems to be the most mature one that I've seen in the market right now. Um, and the only other one that I know of is there is a company called AITOU.
Okay.
Uh, I don't really know the full form, but they launched an H1B sponsorship checker recently, also a Chrome extension, also free. I would just recommend students to install these extensions and let that aid you in the process.
Makes sense. Okay. In terms of, we just spoke about like H1B is more towards like there's like a set amount of like lottery and these many people get it. I know that for there is certain like level where you can go for like gap exempt, which is like non-profits. Can you tell more about that?
Sure. And I'm going to caveat everything that I'm saying on this call by saying that I'm not a lawyer. I've just read a lot about this area, but definitely not a licensed lawyer. So do fact check things. Regarding cap exempt H1B, it's not just nonprofits, and it's also not nonprofits as it's not that any nonprofit can get in a cap exempt H1B. Um, it's a very rigid definition of there are four types of organizations that fall under the cap exempt umbrella. Number one are universities.
Okay.
So most universities qualify, but specifically it has to be either a public or a nonprofit university. I'm forgetting the exact like terminology, but let's just
Yes.
universities is number one. Second would be nonprofit research organizations. So a lot of nonprofits are not research organizations. Um, for example, Gates Foundation, they conduct a ton of research, so they would qualify under this. But a nonprofit that is primarily meant to say provide food for the underprivileged and they don't do any research might not qualify.
Okay.
May not. I'm not saying they don't. Third are nonprofits affiliated with universities. So if there is a strong affiliation between, say, Gates Foundation and Harvard University, um, then or let's not say Gates because Gates already qualifies, but another nonprofit that doesn't qualify on its own, but qualifies because of the affiliation. That's the third. And finally, there is government organizations.
Okay. Make
So, yeah, if you work for any of these types of organizations, then you could get a cap exempt H1B.
Okay, that answers my question. Now let's go more towards O1. So there are two O1 visas, O1A, O1B. Can you tell us like the difference between those two?
Yeah, absolutely. Um, that's actually the first point I want to make is the O1 is not a single entity visa. It
Okay.
has two subdivisions, first of all, O1A, O1B. O1A is meant for anyone who is in the realms of business, science, education, athletics, technology. Like, think of these as five different fields. On the other hand, the O1B is meant for people in the arts and motion picture and television industry. It's a mouthful, but in simpler terms, if you're a founder, an engineer, a product manager, a data scientist, researcher, an athlete of any sort, then you should go for the O1A, not probably, go for the O1A. But if you're, say, a singer, a dancer, an actress, a chef, and so on, go for the O1B.
Yeah.
Um, sometimes you might be thinking, okay, so let's say I'm a UX designer, and I work for a tech company, but I do design. So am I supposed to go for the O1A or O1B?
Yeah.
And that's a decision that your lawyer should make because they know better at this point. So I would just talk to a lawyer at that point.
Okay, that makes sense. So in terms of the O1, let's talk about O1A specifically. What categories are there? People find it like people think, oh, it's an extraordinary visa. It is so difficult to get one, and they mostly go for H1B then. Um, can you share more about the categories and how can one be eligible for that?
Yes. So um, I'm more of a realist in this case because I've gone through an O1 denial. So first of all, the O1 is meant for people at the top of their fields. It's not meant for just anybody out there. So it's not an equivalent of H1B. What I'm trying to say is it's not that anyone out there can be like, okay, I'm going to do the H1 or the O1 because the O1 is meant for people at the top of their fields. So it's very important to remember that. Um, Having said that, the question is, can you get there? Like,
Yeah.
it's okay if you're not there right now. Most 99.9% of people today may not be eligible, but it doesn't mean they can't be eligible ever in the future.
Mhm.
So I wasn't eligible last year, but I was this year. So it's a question of, are you willing to put in the effort it takes to get to a point where you're eligible? And the best part is the getting the O1 is also a great catalyst for you to just make progress in your career because the things that you need to do to get an O1 a lot of the times help you in progressing in your career.
Yeah.
So here's where I think we should talk about the O1 pillars. I call them the O1 pillars. There are 8 criteria that the USCIS came up with to
Okay.
measure if you are someone of extraordinary ability. Um, Number one is original contribution. This is where they check if you contributed originally something novel to your field that has had a huge impact in your field. Number two is critical capacity, where you've played a critical role in an organization that is reasonably distinguished on its own.
Okay.
Third are awards. Have you gotten national or international awards of significance in your field? Number four is memberships. Are you a member of an organization that is distinguished? And did you go through a review process to get into this organization? Number five is publications. Have you been featured in press? Have other people talked about your work in traditional major publications? Number six is authorship. It's kind of the opposite of press, where press is about other people talking about your work.
Yeah.
Authorship is, have you published papers? Have you published articles in press?
Okay.
And so on. Number seven is high salary. Do you command a high salary in your field? And that translates to Do you get paid in the top 10th percentile of people in your role and your location?
Okay.
And finally, we have judging, which is where you've judged hackathons, peer reviewed papers, been on conference committees, and so on. So I know that's a lot. I'm going to pause there to see what questions you have.
Yes. So let's take as an example of a product manager, for example. Let's go over all these categories and maybe like let's try to find what can one do maybe as a product manager to qualify for those categories.
Yes. Actually, a product manager is a good example to start with. Okay. Product manager, I'm going to assume this is somebody with, say, 3 years of experience, 3, 4 years. Assuming they're working for a big tech giant, I would think they probably qualify for the high salary criteria just because companies like Google, Salesforce, Meta, they pay a lot and they probably pay in the 10th percentile for a lot of employees in their company.
Mhm.
So that's number one to go and check. For example, I contested for the high salary criteria in my application, even though I quit my Salesforce job 2 years ago. It doesn't matter. You don't need to currently have a high salary. At any time in the past also counts.
Okay.
So I use that and contested for that. Second, you can go judge competitions in your field. You can go apply for pitch competitions, hackathons, peer review committees in your field,
Mhm.
and essentially just get on the panel and judge the work of others in your field in some capacity.
Makes sense.
So you may not be invited to a nationally renowned hackathon in the beginning, but start small by, say, going to a university competition and
Okay.
then get your foot in the door and slowly go up from there. Um, Judging. Third would be publications. If you worked on a project that has been featured by media in any way, then great. Um, Even if your name is not mentioned in the press article, if you can get, say, a letter from your VP or manager stating that you were a critical part of the project, that's also good proof. I mean, I've seen lawyers use that before. Um, you see how like you only need 3 out of 8 criterias to contest for the O1.
Yeah.
So high salary judging and press gives you 3, and there's many more that I can go into, but
Yeah.
that's gives you an example. Those criterias are easy, but something to keep in mind is, let's say that you've been paid a very high salary, you've judged 2 competitions, and you have one article featured about you and your work. Is that enough? Maybe not,
Okay.
because there is a second step evaluation in the O1 where the officer sees, are you holistically someone of extraordinary ability? And it's called the final merits determination. It sucks in some way because it's kind of subjective, wherein one officer may have a different barometer for what that means than another officer. Um, but my point is that just like rigidly hitting criteria may not be enough sometimes, because it's more about, have you been consistently contributing to your field in a way that has been useful for the field. So this is where I tell people that, look, like, really what the O1 is telling you is, go out there, volunteer, contribute to your field, write articles, provide thought leadership, work on projects that have some significance for the industry.
Yeah.
It's a very like giving kind of mechanism. And if you keep doing that enough for several years, you will probably have a much better shot than someone else who rigidly just sticks to, okay, I'm just going to hit like
Yeah.
one
Categories.
point and reach criteria.
Yeah, that makes sense. Thank you. Um, in terms of like O1, I even myself, I get confused between O1 and EB1. What are the significant differences between both?
Yeah, okay. So just like O1 versus H1B, think of a table, O1, EB1. The first major difference is that the O1 is a non-immigrant visa,
Hmm.
whereas the EB1 is an immigrant visa. So non-immigrant essentially means it's meant for people who are not going to settle down in the US. It's temporary.
Okay.
You have to go back to your home country. Whereas the EB1, an immigrant visa, is meant for people who do plan to settle down in the US permanently. So that's the major difference. In
Okay.
other words, the O1 is a visa, EB1 is a green card. That's a very like simplistic way of saying it.
Okay.
The second major difference is that the O1 cannot be self-petitioned, but the EB1 can be. The EB1A, let me be more specific.
Yeah.
There's three categories under the EB1, but the EB1A you can self-petition for.
Okay.
Whereas the O1A, you still need a sponsor, which can be an individual or a company, but you still need a sponsor.
Makes sense.
And I would say the third difference is the O1 has 8 pillars, the
Mm-hmm.
EB1A has 10 pillars.
Okay.
So, and that's because the O1 is O1A versus O1B,
Mm-hmm.
and it kind of separates people in business, engineering from arts. Whereas
Okay.
the EB1A combines everybody into like one big bucket of EB1A. So the extra 2 pillars are for folks who are in the arts field. Um, but yeah, those are three differences.
Okay. And if a person, for example, if you got like O1 approved, can you apply? Because eventually, if you want to stay here in the United States, your end goal would be to get a green card. Can O1 who got approved for O1, can they apply for EB1 later?
Absolutely. And a lot of people do because the good news is that the criteria, the pillars for the O1 are almost identical to the pillars for the EB1A, except for just those two extra pillars that's there for arts field. So a lot of people use the evidence from their O1 application
Mm-hmm.
and append that with more evidence when they file the EB1A. Even in my own case, right? I got the O1A a few months ago. I haven't made a decision on whether I'm going to do the EB1A, but let's say I do plan to do it. At that point, I will not just file again with the same evidence. I'll probably get more press on my
Right.
work. I'll publish more articles and maybe another book,
Yeah.
and then I'll file for the EB1.
Okay. To make it more strong profile.
Absolutely. To make it, and not just to make it more strong, the EB1 has a higher bar than the O1. So if you think of like the O1 as a bar of this much, EB1 is here.
Yeah.
So you also just need more of evidence to satisfy that.
Makes sense. Okay. Uh, so for an international student who is coming to the US either for bachelor's degree or master's degree, how can they start preparing for, I think it's very important that people start from day one. What would be your advice for them to start from day one?
Yeah, that's a great question. And my advice to a student who just moved to the US is just go and read about the O1 in depth, understand the requirements, the pillars, the myths, the misconceptions. And to make it easier, I actually published a free guide. It's a 12,000 word, very in depth guide on the O1 that I co wrote with my co author, Samir, who's a licensed attorney. So